Welcome to the Ringer NFL show. Sheil Kapadia here with Diante Lee and Steven Ruiz. Good to have you watching on FanDuel TV or listening on Spotify. The regular season is in the books. The playoffs are here. We made it. 14 teams left. We're going to talk Lions Vikings. We're going to talk NFC matchups. We're going to talk AFC matchups. Maybe mix in a little Gerard Mayo. Coaches are already being fired. Diante, how are we doing?
I mean, I'm looking at my co-host here. I see a lot more brightness in the faces. I'm seeing smiles are curled a little bit higher up the cheeks than usual. It feels like the regular season is coming to an end, and now we can really focus our attention on the best teams in the NFL.
It feels like Mason Rudolph, Cooper Rush, Spencer Rattler, all those guys are out of our lives, and we don't have to talk about them over the next month. It's all Lamar Jackson, Josh Allen, Patrick Mahomes, Jahmyr Gibbs, all of the best players in the NFL. No more of these crap games.
That's right. These are where the legacies are shaped, where the offseason storylines, where 10 years from now, when you're talking about a game, it will probably be one of the games we watch in the next month of the season. So we have some fun matchups. We have to start with what happened in the NFC Sunday night. Lions Vikings. We talked about a big game. Winner gets the 1 seed in the bye in home field. Loser goes on the road in the first round against the Los Angeles Rams. And the Detroit Lions took care of business in a very surprising way, beating the Minnesota Vikings 31-9, really dominating the game once we got there to the second half. I'll just start because my biggest takeaway is we spent last week talking about Ben Johnson versus Brian Flores and what a great matchup it was going to be. And the story of this game was on the other side of the ball and what Aaron Glenn did. And for all the coaches that make excuses about injuries and X, Y, and Z, this is what the money's for. This is what you're paid to do. When you have injuries, you're going up against a great offense. Can you come up with a game plan that gives your team an advantage? And that's what he did. Man coverage, blitz, challenging Amik Robertson. And they take it to the Vikings for most of this game. I mean, if you would have told me the Vikings were going to score 9 points in this game last week, I would have never believed you. So, Diante, to me, if you're a Lions fan, you just have to have sort of be rejuvenated a little bit that, yeah, the injuries suck, but man, if that defense can just give us a little something, our offense is good enough to get us to the Super Bowl.
I mean, they blacked out today. They absolutely blacked out in coverage. I don't know how much analysis there will be, like going back to film and just watching. I do think that there's a lot to take away from how they blitzed the Vikings, and I'm sure we'll get to that in the course of the conversation. But just focusing on Aaron Glenn and his use of personnel, At first, I thought that he was putting Amik Robinson on Justin Jefferson to kind of use the Revis principles or Dion principles of putting your second best corner on the number one receiver. You're going to cloud that guy, so send a safety help over the top, and then you'll use Terry and Arnold to kind of lock down Jordan Addison or try to at least be on his side of the field at all times. And you're watching the flow of the game, and it's cover zero and then cover zero again, and then a 5-man pressure with man behind it, and then just regular old cover one. And there just came a point where I had to kind of surrender to the fact that Amik Robinson was just winning these reps. And I think that he was helped, obviously, by the pressure. This was probably Sam Darnold's worst game of the most. Sam Darnold has looked like previous versions of himself that we've seen so far this year. But I also think that this was a badly called game for Kevin O'Connell. If you go by his success rate, this is his worst that he's had since he's taken over as head coach, underneath 30%. Worse in terms of EPA as well. And I think that he and Sam Darnold probably have to take some long looks at each other in the meeting room coming out of this, trying to figure out what the answers are going to be, because this offense just had no answer for picking up pressure when the blitzes came, when it was simulated pressure, or they just rushed 4. Guys were losing their one-on-ones. And that's a big credit to Detroit for being able to get the most out of everybody in a 1-week sample. And that's something we've been seeing since these injuries have piled up, is they've been able to put together these 1-week game plans that have allowed them to dominate their opponents. But I do think after we give them credit, we've got to look at this Vikings offense and ask, if they get blitzed like this again, or they see a bunch of tight coverage like this again, is Sam Darnold going to be able to rise to the occasion, and will Kevin O'Connell have better play calls in those intermediate areas of the field?
I feel like it's the type of performance where we have to look back at it in like a week or two to see if teams do try to replicate this and see what the answers are. Like in a one-off scenario, Aaron Glenn pops a great game plan on you. Like, there's no shame in getting and losing to that, But if it's a recurring theme, then you do have to bring it up. And if we're going to give Kevin O'Connell so much credit for propping up Sam Darnold all season, which I've been doing, then I do have to criticize him for not being able to do that in this game, like Diante said. But I'm going to pump the brakes on kind of questioning the Vikings after this one, just because it is a rematch. If they play it, they play Detroit again in the playoffs, I expect a better plan from Kevin O'Connell. I expect better protection for Sam Darnold. And I don't expect Sam Darnold to miss the throws he made. He missed tonight. I know it looked more like the old Sam Darnold, but he was missing throws that we've seen him complete all season long in the face of pressure. It could be a one-off performance for the Vikings offense, but I think the story, like Sheil said at the top, is this Detroit defense and the ability to put together a game plan to flummox one of the most explosive passing games in the NFL and to take away Justin Jefferson and not open up the opportunities that we've seen opened up when you try to focus all your attention on Justin Jefferson. We've seen that throughout the year. Jordan Addison, Naylor, they have all eaten off of Justin Jefferson's gravity. Didn't happen tonight, and I think it's a testament to Aaron Glenn and the work he's been doing and the shuffling they've been doing in the secondary.
I mean, it's wild. And they get Alex Anzalone back at linebacker, and then Terry and Arnold goes down at cornerback for them. It's like they sort of can't catch a break, but there is like a culture,
right?
Yeah.
It's whackable.
Yeah. But there's definitely a culture thing going on there where they play like a team that believes that they can go up against Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison and play man coverage and play zero blitz and get to them. Like, they probably shouldn't even think that they would be able to do that. But yeah, Next Gen Stats had all the numbers. 67% of the snaps they played man. Darnold was 10 for 28 for 125 yards, and they went cover zero all out blitz 14 times in this game. So we know what's in Aaron Glenn's DNA, and rather than think I got to tweak stuff, he's just like, lean into it and let's see what happens. And again, now if you're the Lions, you're home in the divisional round. You're going to be home in the NFC Championship game if you can get there. So you kind of need two performances from this defense. It doesn't have to be this good. It needs to be good enough, because we saw with that offense is still going to be able to put up points on anybody. Can the defense be good enough for two games where you're going to be favorites and you still, despite all these injuries, have a great chance to get to the Super Bowl?
It was a real 2023 Vikings defensive performance, in my opinion. Like, you don't have the horses. Yes. Let's just get weird with it. Let's just attack them and punch them in the mouth and see if they don't have an answer for it. You could stun them and maybe they don't have a counter punch. And Minnesota didn't come up with one all night long. And I think it is a culture thing. We haven't mentioned Dan Campbell yet, but Aaron Glenn, like I don't know if it was Tariqa or Collinsworth on the broadcast, they were saying that Aaron Glenn felt confident in this style of game plan because Dan Campbell puts that confidence in him that even if it goes wrong, he's not going to get punished for it. He's not going to lose play calling duty. He's not going to get fired just because something goes wrong. And if you need proof of that, just go back to the first 2 years of this partnership where Aaron Glenn has been throwing at the wall, going back to the beginning of his time as a DC for Detroit, when they didn't have the bodies and didn't have the guys that could play man coverage in those first couple of years. And Dan Campbell stuck with them. He stuck with them all along. He didn't fire him, where I think a lot of other coaches who were in this opportunity of a lifetime to have a head coaching gig would have given up on Aaron Glenn after the first 2 years where it didn't work out. But he realized what Aaron Glenn was missing. The front office got Aaron Glenn those pieces. The pieces got hurt this year. And the work and the confidence that Campbell showed in him over those first 2 years, I think paid off a lot tonight.
Yeah, there's no doubt about it. The defense, fantastic. Lions, to go 15 and to have that devastating loss in the playoffs last year, where Dan Campbell tells the team seconds after, we might not ever get back here. It's hard to get back here. To follow that up with a 15-2 season where things are going wrong all over the place along the way is really a credit to him and a credit to, Jahmyr Gibbs in this game. We haven't even mentioned him. Incredible in this game as well. So we'll be talking a lot about the Lions, I have a feeling, in the weeks ahead. To follow up there, Diante, on the Vikings. So now they go to Los Angeles. They're 2.5-point favorites. Ruiz, man, I kind of lean with Ruiz. I was like, I'm not giving up on this Viking. Like, I think they're better than the Rams. I think you got a bad matchup. The other team had great wrinkles. Your quarterback didn't play that well. You couldn't protect. Like, a lot of things went wrong. I'm not going to throw out what happened in the first 17 weeks of the season. At the same time, I can also see, if you're a Vikings fan, going, shoot, is that what it's going to look like with Darnold in a big spot in the playoffs? So where do you land on kind of how concerned Vikings fans should be with this loss, given what's ahead against the Los Angeles Rams?
The data and film tells you that this is probably a blip. right, for this offense. It doesn't mean that it's always going to be, them tearing up and down the field they were when they've been at their hottest so far this season. But I don't think that you'll get another game where the success rate is this low. We're talking about 24% success rate, negative passing EPA. Like, that's just not symptomatic of a Kevin O'Connell passing game, period. And I think that because they were out of game script, because they couldn't rely on moving the chains on third down, you saw a more desperate version of this offense on early downs. And that's not the way they want to live either. And if there is a defense that you can see where I think that they're going to have opportunities to get back into their comfort zone on first and second down, being able to throw play action passes into the intermediate areas of the field, the Rams will give you that on the back end. They may blitz because they do trust their pass rushing core, interior and on the edge with Jared Verse, but they don't have the guys on the back end, nor do they have like the institutional belief in man coverage that that Detroit does on a weekly basis. So I think that you can probably lick your wounds tonight and then show back up on Monday for your team meetings feeling like, we can maybe not throw this out because we've got to see this team again. Let's make sure that we just have in the back of our mind what our answers need to be against man and against blitz in a playoff environment. But other than that, they should be able to get back to operating as usual.
That's where you can kind of spin it as like a positive. This performance for the Vikings offense is that it didn't happen in the playoffs. It didn't happen in a potential like 3 match with Detroit. But I would be concerned just because in the playoffs where you see more rematches, sometimes you're seeing teams for a third time, you get these game plans. You get these one-off game plans that are highly tailored to your weaknesses. And you could just tell by how Tirico and Collinsworth were talking, because they've been talking to these coaches in the production meetings all year long, what the game plan was. It was to make Sam Darnold hold the ball. They believed if Sam Darnold held the ball, and we like kind of pinpointed this a couple weeks ago before the Packers game, that his splits after 3 seconds are not very good. His splits, when he's throwing in rhythm, are some of the best in the league, and they knocked him off his rhythm today. Like the concern isn't so much, they blitz the hell out of him. What are they going to do if they see zero again? It's what if another team finds another way to get him to hold on to the ball, and you only have 30 minutes or so at halftime or in the third quarter to find an answer for it. That could be the end of your season. In the playoffs, it only takes one of those instances.
Yeah, Dan Campbell, when he was shaking Kevin O'Connell's hand, said, "See you in 2 weeks." So I guess probably just being nice, but Vikings go to Los Angeles to take on the Rams. Again, that's the 4-5 matchup. Those two teams faced off in week 8. Rams beat the Lions in that game 30-20. So Rams don't play their starters in week 18. At first I was like, is that a good idea? You're going to have to face the Vikings or Lions. I sort of feel like they thought Matthew Stafford probably needed a breather at this age. Yeah. I mean, for 3 of his last 4 games, 4 of his last 5 games, threw for under 200 yards. They had that awesome performance against the Bills where they put up 44. After that, the offense was really sputtering down the stretch. So I don't have a problem with McVay making that decision. And now they welcome in this Vikings team in Wild Card Weekend. All right, let's take a break. We come back. Let's run through the rest of the NFC. Fun matchups in the NFC. Small lines in the NFC. It is all tightly packed together here. Different story in the AFC. We'll talk about it all when we come back. We are back on the Ringer NFL show. Let me just run through the bracket here a little bit in the NFC. So Lions are the 1 seed. They get the bye, right? The Vikings go to Los Angeles to take on the Rams. That's going to be a Monday night game, 5 versus 4, Vikings at Rams. Other 2 games here in the NFC, you've got on Sunday afternoon and evening. You've got the Packers as the 7 seed going to Philadelphia to take on the Eagles. Eagles are 4.5-point favorites in that game. I think it opened at 3 or 3.5. We'll get to that matchup here in a second. And then you've got Commanders at Bucks. They get the primetime Sunday night matchup. Jaden Daniels in primetime. Bucks are fluctuating between 3 and 3.5-point favorites in that football game. So it is a fun bracket in the NFC here. Let's get to the next matchup. Packers at the Eagles. Again, this is Sunday afternoon. at 4:30. Diante, let's start with you. Where does your attention go? We saw the Packers today. Jordan Love suffers a little bit of an elbow injury. It sounds like he's going to play in this game. We don't know at what strength. These two teams played in week one. I think these are two teams that we've been saying for most of the season, these two teams can certainly get to the Super Bowl. Now they're facing off in the wild card round. What has your attention?
I think it's just trying to sort out what we're going to get out of both quarterbacks, right? I need to see that Jalen Hurts is cleared to return to practice. That's number one, because it's now been a couple of weeks of him being in the protocol. I know they said he's also nursing a finger injury, so it's hard to know if he would have practiced even if he had been cleared out of the protocol coming out of last week, especially knowing that they were going to rest their starters. But I do want to see where he and where Jordan Love are going to be at in a playoff environment. I think that with both of these teams, for different reasons, you have questions about whether or not they can operate at peak capacity because you're just not sure if they're going to be at their hottest. And I think that, at least from Green Bay's perspective, for all the capabilities that we know that they have to be able to, get hot in terms of pass rushing, maybe force a couple turnovers. This defense did end the season, I think, with just as many questions as we had for them coming into the year. So I think in that matchup is going to come down to whether or not Philadelphia can build up some kind of passing rhythm or be explosive the way they were in week one when they matched up. And if that's the case, we'll probably feel pretty good about the Eagles, and I would expect them to win. I think on the other side of this is going to be about whether or not Jordan Love is good enough to be able to lift them up against one of the better coverage units that we've seen in the NFL this year.
How do you feel, Ruiz? You and I picked the Packers to get to the Super Bowl before the season. You stuck with them for most of the season. They get a tough path here where they're the 7th seed, go to Philadelphia, and then even if they win, now you're going to Detroit in the second round. So aside from the Love injury, again, suffered the elbow injury in the first half, came out of the game. Matt LaFleur said if this was like higher stakes, he could have gone back in. So that sounds like good news. But then Christian Watson, they lose him to a knee injury, and that injury, LaFleur said, I don't feel great about, although there was nothing definitive. How do you feel about this matchup for Green Bay as they go to Philadelphia?
I don't feel good. It's starting to feel like one of those lost seasons in Green Bay where Jordan Love hasn't been able to stay healthy for like a month straight, and that's going to continue going into the playoffs no matter how insignificant his injury is. It's never good to be leaving games in December or in January, I guess. And we've talked all year about the Packers defense. When they can't get teams behind the chains, they tend to struggle, and going up against maybe the most reliable run game outside of Detroit in the NFC, that's going to be a tough assignment for this defense. I don't think they're going to be able to make it a game where Jalen Hurts has to be a drop back passer. And I think that's the only way to really beat this Eagles team. The Eagles have only lost 3 times. The common denominator outside of the latest is getting Jalen Hurts to play like that style of football. I just don't see it happening. And with Christian Watson going out, I think it's a bad matchup for the Packers on the other side of the ball too. They need a guy that can create those explosive plays, especially when Philadelphia plays man coverage. And I don't trust any of those other receivers. I don't trust Christian Watson that much. I don't think any of the Packers receivers have earned.
Trust is not the word for him. Yeah.
No, but he is the one with the highest ceiling. He is like the biggest boomer bust receiver in that core, and missing him, that's a big deal for them.
Yeah, we talked about him, I think, a couple weeks ago, where against man coverage, he's their guy. He's their leading receiver against man coverage, overall averaging over 21 yards per reception. So that was a tough one for him. He was emotional getting carted off the field there with the knee injury. But I think you're right. When you go away from the lines of scrimmage in this game and go to the perimeter on both sides of the ball, and you've got A.J. Brown and Devontae Smith against those Packers corners, and they don't have Jair Alexander, that's a tough matchup for the Packers. And then on the other side, when you've got these Eagles corners, Quinyon Mitchell, Slay, Cooper DeJean playing so well, and now you've got a Packers receiving core that is missing one of their mismatch guys on the outside, I think that favors the Eagles. Also, the other thing here, which I didn't realize, I think until the end of last week, if Jalen Hurts is healthy for this game, the Eagles will have all 22 starters healthy for their playoff run. I mean, think about
in 2022, right?
Yeah. Yeah. It's why it's so rare. I keep saying it's so rare. And then I'm like, no, this happened to them 2 years ago, but it is so rare. We just talked about the Lions, and think of all the injuries they've had to overcome and endure. And you're talking about an Eagles team that could be getting healthy here, Diante, at the perfect time.
I mean, we've been having these conversations about the Lions and how capable they are of winning a Super Bowl, and maybe them being tripped up just by having too many guys hurt and landing in the wrong matchup at the wrong time. I think that the inverse is true of Philadelphia. I think that they have warts. There are reasons to be skeptical, at least with this passing offense, when you compare it to what Minnesota's looked like over the course of the year, obviously what Detroit has been over the course of the year, how explosive Green Bay is when they're healthy. For all those questions that we may have, the truth of the matter is the most important thing was that they got all 5 of those offensive linemen and Saquon Barkley into the postseason healthy, and they've got that. And that's going to be the engine that's going to push them through most games, because that's just what's worked for them so far this year. And the defense has just made so many leaps and bounds up front, being able to stop the run from other teams, getting the third down, and then having a great plan for getting off the football field. I think Steven kind of made mention of it in talking about this matchup with the Packers. The pathway for the Eagles is that they can just continue to lean on the fact that they can get up in games, force you into obvious passing situations, and then that's when they can kind of sit on you and just take time off the clock and basically make it a game of possessions. And if they're able to operate that way when they play the Packers, and I would assume so, they should be able to cruise, I would think, to the next round of the postseason.
They also have like the easiest path now. Like, this is the path I would want as an NFC team. They avoid the Vikings and the Lions until the championship round, and then you get the worst of the 3 NFC North playoff teams, or the one that's fading, the one that's trending the worst. The Packers don't feel like a contender right now. Those other 2 teams, Minnesota and Detroit, do feel like contenders, teams that can make the Super Bowl, and Philadelphia is going to avoid them until the championship round now.
Yeah, it could be the Rams or the Bucks going to Philadelphia in the divisional round if the Eagles get out of the first round there against the Green Bay Packers. I mean, we can't sweep under the rug what Diante's saying about their passing offense. You know, it was a month ago where A.J. Brown's unhappy. Their passing game looks terrible against the Panthers. They come back and play a good game against the Steelers the next week. We haven't seen Jalen Hurts since then. You know, you were thinking maybe they'll figure some stuff out down the stretch. That didn't happen. So their passing game is very much an unknown here as they go into the postseason. And historically, the teams that are playing in the championship round, you're not saying that about them, that I don't really know what we're getting from their passing game. So should potential for a fun matchup. I just hope Jordan Love is healthy. I hope we're not watching the first quarter of that game going, oh man, he doesn't look like himself with that elbow injury. So that's Packers at Eagles. Let's take a break. We come back. We talk about the third matchup in the NFC. Back on the Ringer NFL show. There were moments on Sunday where it looked like, is this Tampa team? Are they going to blow this against Spencer Rattler and the New Orleans Saints? They're down 16-6 at halftime. They come back in the second half, beat the New Orleans Saints, get the number 3 seed, and they will host the Washington Commanders, who got a win against the Dallas Cowboys today. Ruiz, let's start with you. Bucks hosting the Commanders Sunday night. What are your eyes going to be on in this matchup?
I really want to go back and revisit that week 1 game. From what I remember from it, the Commanders moved the ball just fine up and down the field. They just couldn't finish off drives in the red zone. And the same is true for the Bucks. I remember them just, I think it was like over 100 yards of yak. I remember there being a lot of screen passes, a lot of bubble screens, and Washington couldn't really do anything to stop it. And I don't think much is going to change with Liam Cohen going up against Dan Quinn's defense. That feels like the biggest coaching mismatch in this matchup. And with the way Washington's offense kind of rebounded in the second half, I know it wasn't Jaden Daniels, Sheil's MVP. It was Marcus Mariota who put up another masterclass. I don't know, getting kind of spooky down there, but yeah, I think the offense has kind of figured things out after that little slow stretch during the middle of the season. It looks more like the offense we saw over the first 2 months of the season when we thought, hey, maybe this Washington team can challenge Philly for the NFC East. I don't know if that's their ceiling, but I do think winning a playoff game is their ceiling now. And going up against this Bucks team, I think was their best possible draw. Yeah,
there's no doubt about it. These it's hard to look at these defenses and go, which of these defenses is going to be able to stop these offenses? You mentioned it, that Bucks defense has not looked good. I mean, it's mostly been a mediocre to below average unit all season long. So now you're going up against Jaden Daniels and that Commanders offense, which, like you said, they had the little issues in the middle of the season. Where is it the ribs? Is it the Cliff? What's going on here?
Cliff.
Cliff was Cliff the most pumped coach of any coach on the sideline today, Deon? Did you see his reaction, Deontay?
Yeah, 1,000%. I mean, it can't feel much better for Cliff than to know, like, not only am I winning in December and January, I just won a game with my backup quarterback in January, something that definitely would not have happened in Arizona.
And Kyler fell off over the last month of the season. Like, that can't be ignored.
Great for your personal narrative, man.
Hey, this was Kyler's first name starts with the K too. We could do the alliteration there with the Kyler Cliff. It still works. But did you hear the report from Schrager before the game? So he was saying Cliff's name's coming up in these coaching searches, but Cliff might be able to just sit back and wait. He can wait on his next job. And I feel like he should, honestly, because this is an ideal situation in Washington. He's grooming a quarterback. The more success Jaden Daniels has, and we all expect him to have more success, the easier it is for him to just walk into the most ideal job. I don't know if that ideal job is out there right now.
I don't disagree with that take. I just always
strike while the iron's hot, Cliff.
I always think it's funny when the report on a coach who's clearly interested in being a head coach again is ended or couched by, but he can wait. That to me usually sounds like he might be ready to take calls. I don't know if calls are coming quite yet.
Let me tell you a story about a guy named Bobby Slowick, Cliff. A year ago at this time, there were some good things.
I mean, don't do that to him. There was questions about Slowick before then.
Well, I mean, there's some pretty appealing jobs out there, though. I mean, if you look at it, like I threw his name out there for Chicago like a month ago, and our friend Nora Princiati almost like made me turn off the podcast. She was so upset by the thought, but I don't know. I mean, like that job could be out there now. The Patriots job is open. I feel like it's not a crowded pool of candidates. You know, it's basically Vrabel, Ben Johnson, and everybody else, and we don't even know if Ben Johnson wants a job. So I feel like it might be again. If I'm Cliff's agent, I'm saying strike while the iron's hot here, Cliff.
You know, the coaching pool is bad when John Gruden's name comes up.
Oh my God.
I have seen John Gruden's name come up more than once. It is bothering me. We're talking about Pete Carroll and on a lot of names that I would say are probably closer to unhireable than they are being real candidates.
Yeah, you're right. It's certainly not a long list of guys who you would say, yes, bring this guy on board right away. That Commanders game today was weird because it sounded like they were playing for seeding. And so Jaden Daniels is playing in the game. Now all of a sudden he gets pulled. And I'm going, why would you play him in the first? But they said afterwards that he had, quote, mild leg soreness, according to the DC report. So, yeah, that would have been, okay. I was wondering why he was out of the game there, but man, they finished 12-5, their last 4 games, 2 game winners in OT, and the other 2 were game winners in the last 10 seconds of regulation. But 12-5 is a pretty wild outcome, Ruiz, for that. I mean, even somebody who was very optimistic about the Commanders, I don't think would have even predicted 12-5 before the season.
No, it's going to be easy to fade this team next year. When we look at all the underlying metrics and their record in close games and all these like 50-50 wins, but no, you have to celebrate this. I mean, they've just come out of 2 decades of Dan Snyder. This is like this is literally their best season since they won the Super Bowl in 1991 by record. They haven't come close to 11 wins, much less 12 wins. This is, and I think I made this point earlier in the season, this is the only time in my life or like that I've been a football fan where I can remember Washington wire to wire being a playoff team all season long. Yeah. Like we've just taken it for granted that they're going to make the playoffs. It's literally never been like that. Even during the RG3 year, they had to back into the playoffs and win like 5 games in a row just to make the wild card. So, or to win the NFC East. So yeah, this is totally different. It's worth celebrating. I don't care if nerds were yelling at me, oh, look at your record in close games. Look at all these fluke wins you have. I wouldn't care. Who cares?
Where does your gut lean, Deontay? Commanders at Bucks. This is
Are
not
you concerned about the leg soreness? My leg soreness is like something I get while recording a podcast.
I was going to say, I woke up today with mild leg soreness.
Yeah, that's the old old man's IT bands acting up a little bit. No, I'm just wondering because I think this is a tough game to pick because you look at the Commanders. I mean, they give up 378 yards and 23 first downs to Trey Lance and Rico Dowdle and Jalen Tolbert. Like, how are they going to do against this Bucs offense? But like we said, is it just going to be a shootout where both teams are going up and down the field? So I was just getting a first impression. I think my first impression pick would be to go with the Commanders in the upset. They've been pulling out these close games, but I don't know. Ruiz, where does your gut say for this one?
It's a coin flip for me. I'll probably lean towards the home team and go with Tampa Bay, but my prediction is this is going to be not the best game of Wild Card Weekend, but the most entertaining game. I think it's going to be the most high scoring game.
Yeah. Deante, what does the gut say?
I've been very pro Bucs, so I'm not going to leave them there. I'm kind of leaning Bucs. I think that home field will be just enough for them to be able to pull this out. But I will say, of the NFC matchups, this is probably the one that could really go in either direction. I do think it's going to be a shootout. I have not seen anything from either defense to suggest otherwise over the course of the year, and especially down the stretch as of late. But I think that both teams can basically have whatever they want offensively. And I think it might ultimately come down to whether or not you get the back-breaking Jaden Daniels scramble. That was basically how they were able to pick up cheap points when they played each other week one, was a bunch of scrambles late in the game. That's how I was able to get that prop bet of him rushing for over 70 yards.
What a memory.
In the year. I'm never forgetting that. I'm never
forget the winners. You're not, I think you're a coach. You're only supposed to forget, the losers, not the winners. The winners wash away.
That's nonsense that you've heard from miserable coaches. I don't ascribe to any of those philosophies. No, I do think this will be a close one. I think that really Jaden Daniels in the running game, and then whether or not Tampa Bay's offensive line can continue to move bodies in the running game for them will be a big deal. I think we saw today against New Orleans when they don't have those throws behind the line of scrimmage or within, a couple of yards of the line of scrimmage pop for explosives. It just changes the feel of this offense when those aren't turning into 10, 15, 20-yard chunk plays. There's not as much for them to rely on, and I think that that's where you get to see Baker Mayfield look a little bit more mortal in the pocket than he has at different points in the year. I'm really interested to see whether or not Dan Quinn can figure out a plan to try to make them a little bit more uncomfortable on those early downs, throwing those quick passes, and then whether or not his quarterback can kind of put the cape on for one more week. But I do think the Bucs will have just enough to get over the top, get over the hump with this one.
Honestly, the best unit in this game might be the Bucs offensive line, which I think is like the most undertold story of the season. There's just been so much focus on Baker Mayfield and like his reclamation project and how he's turned things around in Tampa Bay. But the key to it, if you watch these games, he's throwing from wide open pockets. It's fitting that he wears a red jersey because that's how he's playing. Like he's playing in 7-on-7s and nobody can touch him. And then the run game, like we've seen their dominance in the run game, which has been powered by both the offensive line and this pair of running backs, especially with Bucky Irvin, who was just gliding through that Saints defense at times on Sunday. So I think like the analyst in me wants to see the Bucs kind of advance just because I want to see this offensive line take on one of the better defenses in the NFL or in the NFC in the playoffs. I don't think they're going to get that challenge against Washington.
You mentioned the Bucs offensive line, and one of my favorite moments of the Baker Mayfield was doing this move today, and he probably does this more often. I haven't noticed it, but he'll have a scramble or a run or something, and then he'll like try to give the defender the business, but just as the defender is reacting, he walks away, and then his offensive line will come over and have to fight the guy. I mean, he did this multiple times today. He starts it, and then he walks away, and then the camera is on him. You see his face, but it's his offensive linemen are then having to kind of clean up the mess with the opposing defense. I don't know. It's just something I noticed. We'll see if other quarterbacks, his offensive linemen didn't seem to mind. I'm sure they'd like that kind of thing, but that was hilarious watching today. All right, that's the NFC. I got to tell you, one of my issues here looking at these, and I like too many favorites. So between now and the end of the week, because it's not going to be every favorite that's going to win. I have to go back. I have to look at all these teams really in both conferences. But my first impression for most of them has been to go with the favorite. That's why I kind of forced myself to say, of the underdogs, maybe the Commanders have the best chance to pull the upset there in the NFC. All right, there you go. We will take a break. We will come back and we will move over to the AFC, where I'm going to force these guys to make the case that some of these teams aren't going to get blown out, that they're going to give some of the big dogs in the AFC actual games. We are back on the Ringer NFL show. Let's go through the AFC bracket here. Of course, the Kansas City Chiefs, we'll get to them later, don't worry. Kansas City Chiefs get the bye. I had the wrong read on that game. The first game in the AFC will be the Los Angeles Chargers going to Houston to take on the Texans. That is the first game of Wild Card Weekend, 4:30 Eastern on Saturday. They are 2.5-point favorites, road favorites against Houston. Next, we have the Steelers at the Ravens, facing off for the third time this season in prime time, Saturday night in Baltimore. The Ravens are 9.5-point favorites in that game. We just saw these two teams play a few weeks ago. And then Sunday, early game, Bo Nix, the Broncos, Sean Payton, they get it done against the Chiefs. So now they earn themselves a date at Buffalo to take on the Bills. The Bills are 8.5-point favorites. So two big time spreads here. Ravens 9.5, Bills 8.5 in the AFC. Those are the two biggest spreads of Wild Card Weekend. All right, let's start with the first game here. Chargers at Texans. I think the Chargers are going to be a popular pick. 2.5-point favorites. Diante, are these two teams relatively evenly matched? Are you buying what you're seeing with the Chargers? Do you just want to sell the Texans offense? Where do you come down on this matchup?
I think if you're evaluating rosters, you'd say they're evenly matched. The issue is that the trend lines are going in the wrong direction, at least in Houston's case offensively. I don't know why you would pick the Texans offense to be able to win a playoff game against a defense as sound, as consistent on a down-to-down basis. It just sounded
so mean.
I just don't I don't trust them. And that's with all the belief I have in CJ Stroud, unless they were just able to hit explosive play after explosive play over the top to Nico Collins, which they don't even have the time in the pocket to do at this stage in the season. I just don't know how they don't end up trailing by 9 or 10 points. And then Jim Harbaugh pulls out the old he and Greg Roman special of 22 personnel running power, ISO and duo, and just running the clock out so they don't have enough possessions to come back. And I think if you look at the way that Justin Herbert's been playing over the last 3 weeks, as his volume of passes have gone up in these games, you've seen them be more and more productive offensively. I think that they're starting to strike something that really works for this offense, and they've been able to put up points, albeit up against some struggling defenses the last 2 weeks with the Patriots and Raiders. But I think if you can look at that Broncos game, which is another pretty evenly matched team with them, they were able to figure something out in the passing game that worked for them, and I trust them to do the same thing against the Texans, who also like to play aggressively on the back end.
I don't want to get caught. I don't want to get clipped saying that the Texans have no chance in this game, because I would never say that about a team going up against Greg Roman. Like I think their best avenue to winning is getting Greg Roman to participate in a run pass competition where first down's a run, second down's a run, and then we're just going to leave it up to the quarterbacks on third down. That's been the case in all of the Chargers' losses and disappointing performances on offense this season. And it's been the case for Houston for basically 2 years going now. So I wouldn't be surprised if that does happen. But like Diante said, this is an offense in Houston that's been powered by explosive plays. We've talked about it all year. The success rate has been below Carolina and all the worst offenses in the NFL. The run game has been non-existent. The only thing they've had is CJ Stroud throwing downfield strikes to Nico Collins and the other receivers who are now hurt in this game. With only one receiver to key in on, I think it's going to be very easy for Jesse Minter to put together a plan, put a roof over this passing game, limit explosive plays, and force them to convert on first and second down, move the chains, and convert on third and medium. And I just don't think they have the pass protection or the play calling to do that. And with the way Justin Herbert's playing, I think you can somewhat mitigate the one advantage that Houston does have going for it. It's defense led by DeMeco Ryans. I think Justin Herbert is one of those quarterbacks that kind of puts defensive coordinators, the best defensive coordinators, out of the matchup. I think he takes them out of the matchup and is able to process things quickly enough where that pressure isn't going to bother him like it would other quarterbacks.
Maybe the biggest, to add on to that, maybe the biggest under the radar, I don't know if under the radar storyline is the right way to phrase it, but this Chargers offense, the last 3 weeks, have really played their best games of the season. I was looking up just the percentiles of their last 3 performances: 94th percentile, 93rd percentile, 89th percentile, their last 3 games. That's in terms of EPA per drive. So now the question is it, they faced the Raiders, they faced the Patriots. They did do it against the Broncos as well. Is it a small sample? Is it a blip on the radar? Have they figured something out, to Diante's point, that, hey, let's just play action, early downs, put the ball in Justin Herbert's hands. We don't have to go run, pass. We can open this thing up a little bit more with Ladd McConkey, with Quentin Johnson making a couple big catches today in their victory over the Radar. So I'm kind of looking at that, wondering, have they figured something out? Because you have Herbert, you have Jim Harbaugh, you have Jesse Minter, defensive coordinator. Everyone likes, if I had to pick sort of the under the radar, weird surprise team that maybe is going to be playing on championship weekend. I mean, well, in the AFC, there's certainly no better option. So, all right, here, let's do this exercise right now. Of the teams that are ranked 4 or lower in both conferences, who has the best chance to be playing on championship weekend? I'll run through the teams for you. The Rams, the Vikings, the Eagles. I'm sorry, Rams, Vikings, Packers, Commanders. Those are your options in the NFC. And in the AFC, it is the Texans, Chargers, Steelers, and Broncos. If you had to pick one of those teams ranked 4 seed or lower that we're going to be seeing playing in championship weekend, who do you got?
You made it uninteresting by giving us the Vikings. That's the obvious one. We should limit this to the AFC.
Is it obvious? They're going to go to Detroit?
There are no weird things. There are no weird things happening in the AFC. Let's be honest. But it's going to be one of those 3 teams. It's going to be some combination of those 3 teams, because that means, in your scenario,
I know
that a team is going to Arrowhead and beating Patrick Mahomes, and one of those teams is going to be the Texans, the Chargers, the Russell Wilson Steelers, or the Bo Nix Broncos. It's not happening.
That's why it's a fun exercise.
It probably is the Chargers now that I'm going through the options. So you're right, I guess.
Yeah. So there you go. I have my eyes on that Chargers offense a little. I'm more interested in them than I was a month ago, when I thought, all right, they're beating up on bad teams. They're doing it with their defense. This offense is boring. This offense is annoying. Who cares? Justin Herbert's playing well. They got no one they can throw the football to. Not interested. Now I'm a little more interested. There's a little more of a ceiling there than I previously thought. When has it ever burned anyone who does football analysis to, put a little stock into the Chargers? That always works out.
We need D'Amico Ryans to bait Greg Roman and Jim Harbaugh throughout the week. Just be like, they'd be scared to have a run first script in this game. They would never go run pass every series.
Right. Haven't you seen our defensive tackles? We'll give up trap every play. I bet you won't run it.
Texans go into the playoffs with the worst offense of any team that made the playoffs. They are 25th in DVOA. They are 31st. They finished the season 31st in offensive success rate, ahead of the Cleveland Browns, the New York Giants, the Bears, the Colts, the Titans, the Raiders. All these teams were more likely to produce a positive play on any given snap than the Houston Texans. As we've said for roughly 3 months now on this show, that is unacceptable with CJ Stroud as your quarterback. So we'll see. Listen, playoffs are weird. Maybe they'll come out, they'll smoke the Chargers. That's possible too. The Chargers are 2.5-point favorites. It's not like they're massive favorites. They're going on the road like Diante. I'm with Diante. On paper, I don't think there's a lot really separating these 2 teams, but just in terms of trend lines, some of the coaching we've seen specifically on the offensive side of the ball with Houston, it's just going to be tough for me to get to a point by the end of the week where I'm like, yeah, I trust the Texans to win this game against Jim Harbaugh and Justin Herbert. I don't think I'm going to get there. All right, take a break. We come back. Now, these two is where you're really going to have to earn your money as podcasters. You're going to have to tell me why the Steelers can give the Ravens a game and why the Broncos can give the Bills a game when we come back. We are back on the Ringer NFL show. Steelers at Ravens, number 6 Steelers at number 3 Ravens. Steelers have just fallen apart. Now, this weekend again, this weekend was not an embarrassing performance, but they have lost 4 in a row, 3 blowouts against the Eagles, Ravens, and Chiefs. They keep it close against the Bengals. They still lose that game. They are 9.5-point underdogs. I mean, it wasn't long ago where we were saying, man, Lamar's having trouble against the Steelers. Steelers have Lamar's number, and now here they are, 9.5-point underdogs in Baltimore. Ruiz, I'm going to make you start this one. Give me the case. Let's say, somebody calls you up from Pittsburgh and say, Ruiz, we're paying you $3 million to come to Acrisure Stadium on Wednesday and give our team, give our fans a pep talk on why they can go to Baltimore and beat the Ravens. What are you telling those fine people of Western Pennsylvania?
I'm going to steal the line from Mike Tomlin and say, eventually they're going to burn the house down when it comes to winning time. Like this is what this team has done. It's burned me so many times as an analyst. Every time I'm like, no, this team's different. This is the team that's finally going to break through in the playoffs. They lose to the Titans when they're the favorites by whatever, 8. It was probably the same spread in 2019. I don't know the pathway to victory. I think it's just completing a bunch of explosive plays downfield, which have dried up in the Steelers passing game over the last couple of weeks. I know George Pickens was gone, but his return didn't exactly help them out in the deep passing game the last week. So I don't know what it is. I think it's the Ravens beating themselves. That's how they've lost games all season, especially to inferior opponents. We haven't seen them lose to an inferior opponent without committing a crap load of penalties or making mistakes, untimely drops or fumbles like that. And with the way the offense is ascending and with the way the defense has adjusted, I don't know how you can bank on that because they're not committing penalties like they were before. They're not busting coverages like they were before. And that was the way the Steelers beat them the first time they did it. And I just don't see the game being competitive, but it's got to be a ball control, Mike Tomlin style game. Like he likes to say, high floored football. We don't turn the ball over. We don't commit penalties, and we force the other team to kind of lose the game themselves. I think that's the only viable path, but it's kind of hard to plan around the other team kind of shooting itself in the foot.
Yeah. Diante, you got anything else for the fine people of Western Pennsylvania? Is that it? Just get weird, play Steelers football, look up in the fourth quarter, have everyone go, wait, how is this the score type game? Is there anything they can do from a schematic football perspective after having lost to the Ravens 34-17 just a few weeks ago?
You pull Cam Hayward and TJ Watt into Mike Tomlin's offense and you say, hey, we're going to win this game. It's going to be because of you two.
Yeah.
Beating up on their guards and tackles. And that's not outside of the realm of possibility.
Almost happened against Cincinnati, right?
Yeah, exactly. So that's always there. Ruiz obviously kind of laid out the fact that Baltimore has just struggled in games like this where all they have to do is color within the lines, play simple football. I do think if we're going to be confident in Baltimore, you look over the last month and you see the fact that they've really been leaning on the run game and they've been able to pop explosives in the second halves of run game with their run game. That way, obviously, you're getting great play out of Lamar Jackson as well. And I think most importantly, their defensive success rate against the pass has been great.
Thanks to everyone for watching on FanDuel TV. For more, check us out on Spotify. Check us out at Ringer NFL on YouTube, and check us out wherever you get your podcasts.